It happened silently. I think that's the part that still messes with my mind the most. When the meteorite struck the edge of our quiet valley town yesterday, there was no deafening explosion. There was no blinding flash of light burning through the curtains. No shockwave shattering the windows of my apartment. There was just a deep, subterranean groan that vibrated through the concrete foundation of my building. And then, nothing. I went back to sleep, thinking it was just a minor tremor. I didn't know the earth had simply cracked open. I didn't know that from that deep, cosmic crater, an endless, silent tide of dark liquid had begun to pour into a basin. By the time the bleak, grey dawn broke, my town was gone, swallowed whole. I live on the 6th floor of an old brutalist high-rise. It's the only apartment building in town, sitting on the highest crest of the valley. Everyone else lived in quaint, two-story houses scattered among the woods. When I woke up to a dead, unnatural silence and stepped out onto my balcony, the cold morning air punched the breath out of my lungs. The world I knew had been erased. There were no streets, no trees, no rooftops, no church spire. Nothing. The water had stopped exactly 4 inches below my balcony floor. It had consumed the 5 stories below, and with them, every single person I had ever known. I was stranded on a tiny concrete island, my own making, surrounded by a vast, motionless alien ocean. I couldn't stop staring at it. The water, it was profoundly wrong. It was pitch black, darker than oil, darker than a starry night. Yet, terrifyingly, it was perfectly transparent. It was like looking into an endless, flawless slab of dark obsidian or polished smoked glass. It caught no reflections from the overcast sky. No wind could coax a ripple across its surface. It lay heavy and flat, like a corpse. I leaned over the concrete railing, trying to catch a scent. Or mud, or even dropped down. But there was nothing. It smelled only of absolute sterile cold. An icy void that stung the inside of my nose and made my eyes water. By noon, the crushing isolation became a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I had to know, was anyone else out there? Did anyone make it to the hills before the flood crested? I had to look around, but I had no boat. Who keeps a boat in a 6th floor apartment? I tore through my hall closet and found my only option. A cheap, thin, bright blue inflatable camping mattress. It was a pathetic excuse for a raft, but it was all I had. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I worked the manual foot bump, the squeak of the plastic echoing far too loudly in the dead, silent air. I unscrewed the wooden handle from my kitchen broom to use as a makeshift paddle. I dragged the inflated mattress over the balcony railing and lowered it onto the pristine black surface. It sat there, a vibrant blue rectangle floating on an abyss of nothingness. I climbed over the railing, my heart hammering violently against my ribs, and lowered my weight onto the flimsy rubber. It dipped precariously, the freezing black liquid licking eagerly at the seams, but it held. I pushed off the balcony. I paddled slowly, awkwardly, into the center of the drowned valley. The silence was deafening, pressing in on my eardrums until they rang. Every plunge of the broom handle felt like an intrusion, a violent tear in the quiet. Yet, the vast emptiness immediately swallowed the sound of splashing. After paddling for what felt like hours, but was probably only asphalt, rooted to the ground. Their clothes hung unnaturally still, untouched by the physics of water. Their skin was bloated, glowing with a sickly pale bioluminescent hue in the dark depths, and every single one of them had their heads tilted back. They were looking straight up at me. Their eyes were stretched impossibly wide, unblinking, dead. 100 pale dead eyes, glowing faintly in the pitch black, locked onto the tiny shadow of my mattress, gliding over their heads. I froze, too terrified to even breathe. Then, a low, guttural vibration suddenly hummed through the wooden broom handle in my hands. I gasped, yanking it out of the water. The perfectly still surface around me began to tremble. Tiny, impossible ripples formed over the abyss. I looked back down. Deep below, the figures were no longer standing still. They weren't moving their arms or legs to swim. They were just ascending, levitating through the black water. They were floating straight up toward the surface at a terrifying, relentless speed, maintaining their rigid, upright postures, and their wide, dead eyes never left mine. Pure, unadulterated animal panic seized me. I drove the broken broom handle into the water, paddling frantically, violently, tearing the surface apart as I steered back toward my building. My muscles screamed, my lungs burned. The water beneath me began to churn and bubble with a sickening intensity. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I crashed the front of the mattress hard against the concrete of my balcony, scrambled over the railing in a clumsy panic, and hauled the dripping blue rubber mat up with me. I collapsed on the living room floor, gasping for air, my whole body shaking. But the vibration didn't stop. I could feel it in the concrete floor now. I looked back at the edge of the balcony. The water level was rising, fast. The liquid that had remained stagnant for an entire day was now surging upwards. It poured over the edge of my balcony, slick and heavy, like crude oil, flooding into my living room with a horrific, wet, hissing sound. They were coming for me. I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to grab food or warm clothes. Clutching the partially deflated mattress to my chest like a useless shield, I bolted out of my apartment, kicking my front door open and threw myself into the stairwell. I had to go up. I scrambled up the concrete steps, climbing desperately toward the roof access. Behind me, the sound of the rising black tide rushing up the stairs was accompanied by something infinitely worse. A sickening wet chorus of soft, heavy thuds echoing against the concrete walls of the stairwell. Thud, squelch, thud. It was the sound of bloated bodies bumping against the railings and the walls as they floated up the stairs, right behind me. I reached the top floor, kicked open the heavy metal fire door, and stumbled out onto the flat, tar-papered roof. I was completely cornered. I looked over the parapet. The black tide didn't care about gravity. It was surging up the exterior walls of the building like a living slime, crawling over the concrete edges. In seconds, the roof would be completely submerged, with nowhere left to run. I threw the mattress onto the rising black water, which was now pooling rapidly around my ankles, and leaped onto it just as the roof vanished completely beneath the surface. I was adrift again. I threw the broom handle away. It was useless now, and paddled madly with my bare hands into the endless, empty, dark abyss as the very last traces of my world sank away beneath me. The sky above was indifferent and grey, offering no salvation. I paddled until my arms went numb, putting as much distance between myself and the submerged building as I could. Finally, I stopped. My chest heaved in violent Before I could even shift my weight, I felt a sharp, violent tear right beneath my knees. Those fingers hadn't just grabbed the sides, they had dug their nails directly into the bottom of the mattress. With a deafening, terrifying hiss, the rubber was ripped wide open. The air rushed out in a violent burst, and the mattress collapsed instantly under my weight. The freezing black water rushed over me, dragging me down into the crushing depths. Pale, ice-cold hands wrapped around my ankles, my wrists, my throat, pulling me deeper. I fought, thrashing wildly in the freezing void, but they were too strong. As the last of my breath escaped my lips in a flurry of silver bubbles, I sank into the black abyss, surrounded on all sides by hundreds of unblinking dead eyes, welcoming me to the bottom.